Hello and welcome to Community Theology Thursdays. My name is the Reverend Natasha Beckles, and it's my great privilege to say I'm the rector of St. Nicholas Church in Perivale, the home of Community Theology Thursdays, or CTT, where theology is done in community, where global majority God talk has very much moved into the parish and into the neighborhood. It's been a while since our last gathering. Let me say that I hope you had a blessed Christmas and New Year. It seems like miles and miles away now. And that 2025 has started with some grace and peace for you and yours. This week, this month, we're here together. I'm so delighted to be joined today by Akeem Adagbada. I'm going to get it right. Adagbada. How are you, brother?
I'm very well. Good attempt to try and pronouncing my surnames.
I'm
Even
learning.
Nigerians struggle to say my surname. So yeah,
Really?
yeah, they don't even know where it's because it's a kind of a unique name. So they always kind of struggle, like, wait, how do I say this bit, that bit? But hey, it's Adagbada if you want to know.
Beautiful. What does it mean? Do you know?
Okay, so I'm sure you know about the agbada that people wear, the men wear,
Uh-huh.
the traditional clothing. So that's called an agbada. So
Hmm.
it could potentially mean two things. It can be someone who sews agbada, um, and so maybe someone within the family that was their trade. They sold agbada, or it could mean someone who, because when you put on agbada, it's like it shows wealth, it shows prestige, and so it could be a way of signifying someone was wealthy. So it could be any of those two meanings.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So what came to my mind was, Joseph and his coat and how much the cloak always means leadership, whether it's
Exactly.
Elijah or all of these things.
Exactly.
There's a whole discussion in that. I can see and hear. Well, I'll be working on it. It's good to be learning. So thank you for correcting me and teaching me. So I wanted to ask you, Akeem, where are you today?
So I'm based in London, primarily Peckham, um, which is well, it used to be mini Lagos,
Mm.
but it's increasingly changed, gentrified. You know what that
Mm.
means. But yeah, I'm living, I breathe and live in Peckham. So yeah, that's home for us.
Amen, amen, amen. Well, I'm your host today, your partner in conversations, and I really want to give our community, our audience, an opportunity to get a sense of what a privilege it is to have you with us, have you in our community. Akeem is a person that we've known each other, in the crowds of all of these things for quite a few years, but to sit down with him and really get a sense of the journey that God is taking you on and talking about that. So I'm going to help everybody get a sense of how blessed we are to have you. So Akeem is a lawyer and a PhD student at the Faculty of Divinity at the University of Cambridge. Akeem is an Ian Carton honorary PhD scholar at the Wolf Institute. And his research focuses on a Yoruba festival called Ife. Have I got that right?
It's in Ife, but it's called Edi Festival. Edi.
Idi, Idi Festival, which was held at the city of 201 gods in Nigeria. Akim is a theologian and a religious scholar who is passionate in researching Yoruba Orisha religions and Christianity. He writes on the relationship between art and theology, African indigenous religions, and Christian theology. Akeem has recently appeared on the BBC Sunday Morning Live show. So if you want to look him up, that was very recent. I saw you to discuss African spirituality. And he's part of a local Anglican church in Peckham. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you, thank you.
So, I'm really excited because we're going to take a journey that's a little departure from the way we, as Community Theology Thursday, would normally do. This podcast would normally be the kind of cleanup after a public lecture and a talk through where questions had come from the community, and we did the podcast to make sure that all the questions were answered. But you haven't done a public lecture for us. I'm asking you now. I want you to come. So we'll book you
Send the
in.
invite. Send the invite.
But there's so much richness in what you are studying right now, and what you're calling to all of this. That I want to spend the first of our hour. We're going to spend 2 hours here. First part of our, it might be in two parts as it comes across to people, but the first hour we're going to focus on you and your research, and really get a sense of what it's about, what brought you to it. And then the second part, there's a kind of so what, you and your God, how that has really sat into you, and, where that's gone for you. Akeem has been so kind also to give us some book recommendations. So Lord help me, Holy Spirit help me to remember to talk about those as well. So buckle up, everyone, because there's, just one conversation with Akeem, and it's just rich. It's just rich. So prepare yourself, wash your hands, wash your heart, be ready to listen in to all that this conversation will bring. Okay, so let's kick off. Akeem, tell us about your PhD and the field work that you've been engaging with.
Great question. Well, my PhD is essentially, I would say at the core of it, it's studying African traditional religion, and more specifically, Yoruba Orisha worship, in the context of Nigeria, the Southwest, Yoruba speaking part of Nigeria. And what I'm doing is primarily studying a very big festival in Ile-Ife. And Ile-Ife is, according to the Yoruba imagination, Ile-Ife is where God created the earth, is where the gods, the Orishas, came down and created. So it's such an important spiritual place for the Yoruba people, and they would say for the entire humanity. And is also simultaneously seen as the city of 201 gods or 401 gods, just a city of multiplicities of gods. So it's a very, very deeply spiritual place. So I'm studying a very big festival there. There's like seven major festivals. There's festivals every day, but there's like seven big ones, and I'm studying one of them as a route to actually understanding what Yoruba Orisha worship is. And so part of that is I've just come back from research, from field work. So I spent about 3 months in Ile-Ife last year, which was incredible, I must say. It's weird just being there, I think. It's just one of those places which I don't think there's that many places on earth that is like Ile-Ife. Maybe New Orleans would come close, perhaps. But yeah, that's primarily the kind of things I'm studying. So I spent most of my time in the shrines, speaking, researching, observing different religious practices and different rituals, speaking and just basically sitting at the feet of chief priest and priestess of different shrines. Spent some time with Babalawo priest, which is an Ifa priest, just learning really. And then I also split my time between primarily the church. So I spread myself speaking to a lot of Anglican vicars, and Pentecostal pastors, different basically Christian leaders within Ile-Ife. And then I was privileged to have some time with the chief imam of Ife and a local sheikh. So yeah, that was kind of my work. But really at the end of it, the aim is to theologize. So that's where my heart is. I'm a theologian, but in order to do a different kind of theology, I think it's important for me anyway to become a student of African traditional religion, as opposed to just doing theology and then superimposing, you know, African, whatever African traditional religion is. So I thought it's better to go through the route of actually learning and studying it first, and then, you know, branching off to do a bit more hard theology and ask difficult questions. Yeah, so that's kind of my work.
That's fantastic. What a wonderful explanation. You can see the workings and the peace that you get from it. You know, you're enjoying it. I can see the smile, man. You're enjoying the thinking and the remembering of it. So, what was it that brought you to explore this subject? Why?
That's a very good question. I think it wasn't overnight, to be quite honest. I think it took many years, and I don't know if I can necessarily locate when it started. But what I would say is, I mean, I've been studying theology even before I went to do a master's or doing a PhD. So I've been reading quite generally because I mean, I've always been someone who likes to ask questions about my faith, ask questions about the community. I see some of the issues that are within our community, some of the questions that are bubbling up, and I think, wait, is there an answer? Can we explore this? So I've always wanted to explore certain kinds of questions. So I remember many, many years ago, um, I'm not going to mention the name of the Christian artist, kind of rapper, UK, very massive. And, he is well known within the UK circuit. And then, all of a sudden he said he's abandoned Christianity because it was the white man's religion. This is years ago, probably like more than 10 years ago. I think Natasha knows exactly who I might be talking about. And he just said, no, I'm rejecting all of this. This religion has oppressed my people, has never given us space to find God for ourselves. And he just said, I'm done with white man religion. So, those kinds of, I remember kind of hearing that. And I mean, say it didn't create a dent in my faith, but it made me sit up and think, wait, maybe he's got a point and maybe there's something to explore there. So I think those kinds of questions have always kind of sat in the last 15 years, I would say, within me. And then maybe more recently, I'd say in the last 8 years, I started reading about certain questions, particularly about African traditional religion, African spirituality, and Christianity. What's the history? We know it's colonial, but is there more going on there that we could potentially explore? And I think one of the first thing that helped me was reading. I'll give a shout out. He's dead now, but he's an incredible theologian, missiologist, as they call him, Lamin Sani. So this is his book, Whose Religion is Christianity, the Gospel Beyond the West. And I read that many, many years ago. And I think one of, and the reason why I would recommend that, I didn't put it in the recommendation, but it's a really great book because he writes really for the layman. And he asks probing questions and then answers. So that's the structure of the book. It's like a question and then he answers. And it's just a series of really helpful questions that most Black Christians would have about their faith, about their history, about colonial history, about African spirituality, whether that's in the diaspora or on the continent. And he just engages with those big, hard questions. And I think for me, seeing even just that gave me the license to think, actually, it's possible. And I think that's what it is. It's having the opportunity to just to know that someone else can ask those questions or someone else has asked those questions gave me the license to think, oh, actually, I'm not sinning here, but actually wanting to wrestle with God about my history. What it does it mean to be a Black man, a Black British, to live in London and to come from Nigeria? And what is it? What does it mean to be a Christian and yet still be African, whatever that means? So these are the questions I think Lamin Sani dealt with, and from then on, it just became a snowball of just reading and engaging and listening to different podcasts and just doing different things like this, like what me and Natasha are doing here these are kind of the resources I think helped me in the past, and hopefully it helps you as well.
Incredible, incredible. And I mean, just in case anybody's thinking, well, what stops, Black Christians from having these kind of conversations? Could you just lay out what has been the interruption? Why is it that Christianity has been seen as this white man's religion, as this young person had, I know who you're talking about, reflected? How did we get to a point that it's not already offered? Because there might be someone who's listening, I'm not censoring them, but listening, who's like, well, why, how come? How is that?
As in, you mean how did we get to the place where some people are saying it's the white man's religion? Is that the
Yeah.
question?
Yeah. Well, how is it we've got to a point that some of us are having to ask that? What is the trauma that has interrupted that? I wanted to give you a chance to just speak to what that is. It's a very obvious question for some, but
Yeah, for others, it may not necessarily be obvious, but
mm,
I think, okay, I'll use my own context because it's always easier to speak from your own stories. So I was kind of fortunate, where I grew up was Southeast London, which has a huge Black community, right? Both Caribbeans and Africans. Massive, massive community. So, and then I went to a secondary school that was honestly predominantly Black. So I was kind of shielded to some extent, even though coincidentally I lived in probably one of the most racist areas in London, which was Bermondsey, South Bermondsey, in those days, in the 90s and early noughts. We're talking National Front,
yeah, yeah.
war, all that kind of stuff. The blues, if anyone from
Mm,
Southeast London know about the blues, you know exactly what that means. It's an area in Bermondsey you dare not pass as a non-white because you'd
hmm
be attacked. And we
mm,
were experiencing this day and night as teenagers, students.
yeah.
I'm talking my secondary school days, year 7 to year 11. So in a sense, we were still shielded, even though there was in your face racism, as in they would come and write on your door, the N word, you need to go back to your country. But I don't think we had the capacity or had the capacity to actually process. I just thought this was just everyday life and you just survive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So then I was fortunate that the Black church that I went to again was a bit of a sh sheltered us.
Mm,
But I think, for me, I kind of moved out of the Black church, even though now I've come back to the Black church, but I kind of moved out for different reasons, theological reasons. And you
mm,
start moving in the white space.
mm,
And I think that's when, for some of us, we may start asking certain kinds of questions, like, wait a
mm,
second, why am I experiencing racism within the church? We're supposed
mm,
to be the body of Christ, right? Where we're all brothers and sisters in Christ. And then you start asking questions, wait, why are the images constantly white? These kinds of questions where perhaps you might be shielded in within the Black church begins to emerge.
mm,
Um, and I think for them, most people just start exploring, like, wait a second, why is all the saints that I read about, why are all the angels, why is God? I mean, just think about it. When close your eyes and imagine what God looks like. I
mm,
promise you, for me anyway, then, and probably still now, still struggle, is a white father with
mm,
gray beard. But
mhm,
why is that how, like, what is it that has taught us that God must be a white old man? So all these kinds of questions, I think, have always been within the community, and you see it across our history, whether that's in America, in the Caribbean, or Africa. You see different evolutions of the same questions constantly,
mm,
and we're trying to find space within the Jewish Messiah
mm,
that allows us to find wholeness within our broken selves.
mm,
So I think, for some people, the first thing that they look at is, wait, if Jesus and Christianity is for us, if we look at the history of Christianity, it's always been the religion that has oppressed us and killed us and raped us and destroyed our communities for the last 500, 600 years.
mm,
How is it that we say Jesus is for the Black community, where
Yeah.
everything that represents him has always been against us. And for them, for some people, that's the moment where they think, I need to ask different questions, or I just need to just reject this Jesus and turn to
Mm.
what the faith of our ancestors, at least that is authentic to us.
Mhm.
Um, so I'll say it's a multiplicities of different questions that people may have. People may come to it through church hurt. There's so
Mm.
many different things that brings them to these kind of crises.
Mm.
I wouldn't even want to call it a crisis, but like actually asking probing
Crossroads.
questions. So yeah, I don't know if that kind of captures what you're alluding to.
Yeah, yeah, it does. It does. I mean, there's the simple aspect that, we've got Christianity connected to colonialism means that the approach in which Jesus was shared to
Yeah,
people, and then the way that history has been laid out and the imagery that was placed there. But that's, I suppose, flying out of MA training yourself, that that is the Jesus the colonizer type imagery.
yeah,
And how is it that we actually get a chance to step back from that narrative and look at an alternative version of Christ that actually better matches
yes,
the man that you find in the Gospels?
yes,
So, that journey is everybody's doing it, but I think you beautifully explained how, these questions arise, and that journey of faith, what that looks like from the inside. So thank you
mhm,
so much for sharing that. So we're going to talk about you and your faith a bit later on, but I wanted to get through some more of these questions. And that was entirely my fault and my my digression. Um,
no.
Lay out for us the kind of basics. What is Ifa? Can you explain its cosmology and its heart view?
That's a very good question. I mean, it's hard to define Ifa. Um, the only reason why I say that is most people would think Ifa is purely just religion, but Ifa is much more complex than that. I would say Ifa is is like the foundation of the Yoruba culture, and so it kind of captures all aspects of the Yoruba life. And that's why I'm saying it can't just be seen as religion. So it's both religion, of course, if it's also religion, because it has to do with divination and communing with God to understand one's destiny. So that element of the supernatural will always involve what we understand as religion. For them, it may not have been religion, it might have just been a way of life. That's what I'm saying. It captures the Yoruba culture and the way of life. But also your Ifa is also philosophy, it's also science, it's also ideology, and it basically captures every aspect of the Yoruba life. It becomes the bedrock of the Yoruba life. But how most of us would understand Ifa today would be a divination system. Um, a classic example is say your client and you're having, specific issues within your life and you do not know or you don't have any solution to it because, maybe these problems are, supernatural. For example, you would go to an Ifa priest, which is a Babalawo priest, and you would consult Ifa, who's also known as Orumila, and you would essentially do a divination system, a process, where essentially your problems will be told to you. So it's quite interesting. You don't tell the Babalawo what your issue is. They'll give you the kind of the tools in which they kind of cast the dice, and you speak into it silently so that the Ifa priest doesn't actually hear what you say, because essentially you're trying to test how true this is, right? And he would then throw the dice to see to basically read what the issue is. And then what he essentially does is through different verses within Ifa corpus. So Ifa has verses like the Bible, for example, like huge amounts of collections. It's like 256 Odu Ifas. And what they are is like essentially like chapters. So imagine one Odu is like a chapter, and within that chapter, there's like hundreds of verses. And the amazing thing is most Ifa priest would remember, would know these verses. So essentially, when a client comes to them, if they now want to prescribe a solution, they would anchor their story upon one of the verses, which can be which we're talking thousands. And so when they're kind of reciting what the solution is, they would use those Odrifas to communicate what your issue is. And you would know like, oh wow, that's exactly what the problem is. And then they would usually prescribe a form of sacrifice. So sacrifice is almost at the heart of the Yoruba Ifa divination practice, or even Yoruba religion more generally. Sacrifice is such a big thing. And that's not necessarily like always a big sacrifice, like an animal sacrifice, but sacrifice is always the thing that essentially moves the Orishas to work and act on your behalf. So that's kind of how I would understand Ifa. But like I said, it's philosophy. So for me, when I want to study Ifa, I'm much more interested in the philosophy aspects of it as a route to Christian theology. I don't know if you know what I mean. Um, those are the aspects that I'm much more fascinated about. Is actually what are the worldviews of Ifa? What's the cosmology, like you explained? And those are the things that I think are very important for me as a Christian theologian to take seriously, and to dialogue with within my faith.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm just eating, just taking in what you're saying here. And so my next question is then, who is God to the Yoruba people?
Good question. I mean, where do we start? We can start where some of the missionaries, it's maybe we'll start with the missionaries, perhaps. Um, the question of who God is to the Yoruba is still not 100%, um, it's not 100% clear cut, even amongst the Yoruba. But the general consensus is that Olodumare is the God to the Yoruba. That's the general consensus. So when the missionaries first went to Nigeria, then it wasn't Nigeria, it was just, Yoruba land, whatever, right? When they went there in the 19th century, some of the missionaries understood the principle that God precedes the missionaries. So God's already there, right? Some of the really important missionaries already understood that principle. So for them, they were wanting to find the rhythms and the patterns of God within the Yoruba religion to point that God already precedes the missionaries. So for them, they automatically latched onto the Yoruba idea of Olodumare. But Olodumare is complex in the sense of, though the Yoruba have a high view of God and they understand who Olodumare is, Olodumare was not God in the way we understand it, like close and personal. Olodumare was almost like above, seated above, and what becomes more relevant for them are the Orishas, the
Mm,
gods, right?
mm,
That's what they knew, that's what they understood, that's what they can commune with, that's
mm,
what they could, have relationship with. Because some of
mm,
these Orishas were human beings as well, right? That have passed on,
mm, mm,
transitioned, but the Orishas were much closer to them. So when some of the missionaries went there, they were like, yeah, these guys have no concept of God because for them, there's just the Orishas. But some of the other missionaries who were Yoruba themselves were like, no, if you look to what is behind the Orishas, you see that the Orishas are the way in which the Yoruba were still trying to commune with God. So God is still
mm,
behind the Orishas. So God is
mm.
the ultimate end of their worship.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does, it does. We had Harvey come and visit us and talk to us about giving us a kind of framework as to cosmology or cosmologies in the African, traditional religion. and that there you have the supreme God, but he's got an entourage,
Yes.
and there is this of divinities,
Yes.
and then
Yes.
below that is the spirit
Yeah.
world, and
Yeah.
below that is humans, and below that is creation. And
Yeah.
so what you're saying matches exactly that. And
Mhm.
that his argument was that that is actually the background to
Mhm.
what the
Mhm.
Bible is. So in
Mhm.
terms of, and this is why when someone like Abraham is entertaining angels, actually it is God, but they're part of the entourage, just turning up, showing that God is here.
Exactly.
I use the word entourage because think it helps everybody understand. There's one person that is central, but this whole network of people is the crew that you move with. And in that sense, I'm trying to put it so a range of people can understand what we're saying.
I like that phrase entourage. I've not actually thought about it like that, but I might start using it because I was thinking much more, for example, as I would see the Orishas some as messengers, but I like the entourage thing. That's a good one. I might have to nick it.
You can have it, my love. You can have it. But this idea that, when Mary meets this angel, God is there. This all he's present
Hmm.
to and the Holy Spirit. All of this
Hmm.
is there, but there's just one person who's coming as the messenger that's
Hmm.
having that conversation with you. And in
Hmm.
that sense, I've seen the Orisha as
Hmm.
having that conversation with you. Fabulous, fabulous. Okay, so you did actually start to move us into having a little bit of a question about the missionaries. And so
Hmm.
my next question was like, who were they? Because you've already alluded to the fact that there's a range of thinking going on, and I know I'm part of that crew that's like they were terrible and they did this and they abused us. But who were the missionaries?
Um, Good question. I mean, when I first were thinking about the missionaries, I also thought they were evil people and we need to, you know, just
Wash
reject,
them out.
wash them out, reject all of them. But the more I started doing more archival work and wanting to understand the early missionaries that were sent to Yoruba land in the 19th century, I started getting, I started tripping up because it just didn't fit what I wanted to believe, which was they were all evil. But the reality is, it was a lot more complex. It was a lot more messy, um, and not all missionaries were the same, even within the same denomination or the same sending group. Not all missionaries had the same views. Not all missionaries thought the same. And we should believe that that's normal, right? We all don't think alike, even if we have similar positions or convictions. So you see that expressed within the missionaries. So who are the missionaries that were sent to Yoruba land? Initially, I would say it started off in the mid 19th century, but it goes back further to explain. So during the early 19th century, the Oyo Empire, which some of you may know or may not have known, but it was one of the most powerful empires in West Africa, and it ruled for centuries, right? Incredibly powerful, spanned across, you know, what we now know as Nigeria and almost tipping towards Togo, Ghana to some extent. So it was huge, powerful, and it dominated, right? It was just another form of colonialism. That's why, for example, there's a particular academic that does not like African history to be pre-colonial and colonial. And he thinks that kind of mapping of histories doesn't make sense because it centers British
Whiteness.
colonialism and whiteness. Meanwhile, British colonialism only lasted not even 100 years, but we
Mm.
have decades of other colonial forms within the African continent that lasted 500 years, 1,000 years, right? So
Yeah.
he does not necessarily like that kind of, pre
Binary way of seeing it that centers
exactly,
whiteness in there. Yeah,
exactly.
I see it.
So Oyo Empire ruled for a very, very long time. But what happened was by the early 19th century, it started to crumble and it basically collapsed by the maybe like 1820, 1830. By the 1830, it was done. 1830, it was done. But what you find is in the collapse of Oyo Empire, there was still a lot of slavery happening, enslaving. So, you go to your neighbor and you will, kill them, raid them, and sell them off. So by that time, the British had already abolished quote unquote slavery. But what you find, and then they set up the British naval force that would kind of patrol most of West Africa.
Also,
Uh,
the trade, not the slavery, but the trade they cut.
the trading. So they set up the naval force that patrols the West Africa in early 19th century as a way of stopping the trade from continuing. Um, but what you find is a lot of Portuguese were still engaged in it. So when the empire collapsed, you just see infighting within the Yoruba. So you had this hegemony at the top that controlled everything. Once it imploded, all the different ethnic groups were fighting amongst themselves. And then you already know what that means. If I defeat your kingdom or your city, I'm going to take half of you and sell you off to the Portuguese who were waiting in Badagry to ship you off. And so that's essentially what was happening in the early 19th century, just infighting, and a lot of Yorubas were passing through to the Portuguese, were being sold off to the Portuguese. Interestingly, so why this is important to what I'm saying about the missionaries is you understand what I mean now is so a lot of the ships heading towards Brazil, because at that time coming towards the Americas was a no-no, it was very difficult. So the easiest way was to go to Brazil. And that's why you see to some extent Brazilians have more of a closer because their histories are shorter to the West Africans than say the Caribbeans or the America, for example, or America, for
Yeah,
example. The history is incredibly short. So
yeah.
most of them ended up there in the later 18th century and early 19th century. So very close, very, very close.
Mm,
So on most of them were being shipped towards Brazil, and the ones that were caught by the British naval it would interrupt the trade and send them to Sierra Leone. So if you remember, Sierra Leone in the mid 18th century became the place in which Africans could achieve their freedom. There was early Christianity there. So people like William Wilberforce, the Clapham sect, that essentially campaigned for the end of slavery in the UK, really saw Sierra Leone as, the place to build African Christian society. That's what Freetown became for them. And essentially it was a way of getting rid of the black people in Britain at the time as well.
yes.
Be honest. They were just trying to ship them off. The
Yeah, yeah,
same way we're doing it now, just, Rwanda, let's just get
yeah.
rid of people. So really, that's where it really comes from. So Sierra Leone becomes the place in which they could just dump black people on the streets of London in the 18th century. So
Mm,
anyway, so it became this project. So a lot of the Yorubas that got rescued ended up in Sierra Leone in the
mm,
early 19th century. But remember, 100 years before, Christianity and different Africans and even African Americans had settled in Sierra Leone. So there was a buoyant Christian Black African community already in Freetown. So
mm,
they just thought, Freetown, freedom, right? Freetown, that's what
mm.
it was, freedom. You go there, you obtain your freedom. So you have a growing Yoruba community, huge community in Sierra Leone I would say, by 1840. Huge Christian, African, Yoruba community, right? Obtained
Doing
freedom.
their
Most
thing.
of them had gone through the colonial education. So at the time, they thought primarily, look, sending white missionaries to Yoruba land was death trap. I mean, they've been dying easily. Some don't even last a month, right? Malaria just wipes them out. So why are we going to waste white lives to try and save these Africans from darkness when we already have a community of Black, Yoruba, Christians who we have fashioned in our own image, we can send them to their own people. It's easier. They understand the language, they understand the culture, they speak the language, and it's their brothers and sisters, and they're Christians. Hey, easy job. So in that time, it was called like the native pastoral kind of idea, which was let's put resources to develop the natives so they can reach their own people. So that was the policy that was going through the Anglican missionary wing, the Church Mission Society in Britain at the time. They had this huge debate on, can we empower the native to reach their own people? Some because of racist reasons, were like against it, and others, the few, were like no, and they had money, so they could really push this idea. So anyway, so by the 19th, mid 19th century, 1840, the British Anglican Church in Sierra Leone wanted to start exploring the inlands, particularly Yoruba land. And so they hired, different ships and thought we're going to explore. So interestingly enough, they took a man called Reverend Samuel Johnson, no, Samuel Crowther, who we all may know. So Reverend Samuel Crowther was a Yoruba prince. Actually, his great grandfather from his mother's side was the Alaafin of Oyo, which means the Emperor of Oyo Empire. So he's from a ruling family, gets captured at the age of 12, on his way to Brazil, gets rescued and ends up in Sierra Leone. So from the age of 13, 14, he's in Sierra Leone, joins the missionary schools, learns English, learns Greek. He's fantastic with languages. That's his thing, and becomes a Christian and becomes a missionary. So he kind of was one of the first who went with majority white people to Nigeria, to Yoruba land to explore. And that's when some of them, when they returned, were like, wait, was home that close? So some of these guys ended up in Sierra Leone, but didn't realize that Sierra Leone is not far away from Nigeria. So they were like, it's that close? Like, it's literally like four countries down. We could sail for like a day or two and end up. And they couldn't believe how close when they returned. Like, oh yeah, we visited Yoruba land. We saw this. You saw my uncle. You saw my auntie. Literally, I was reading this and they were like going crazy, like, it's this close. And then all of a sudden you have, I call it probably one of the first waves of return back home. So what we're seeing today is not a new thing. So by the 1840s, late 1840s, you have a huge community of Yoruba within Sierra Leone, like, I'm shipping and I'm going back home because I didn't realize how close it was. So you now have a Christian sect community leaving Sierra Leone and returning back to their different communities within Yoruba land in the mid 19th century. And obviously, what were they returning with primarily? Christianity. So you have that sect returning with their faith, their newfound faith in Jesus. Also, you have another set of Sierra Leone, of Brazilians who are Yoruba. Again, maybe their dad or their grandfather were the ones who ended up in Sierra Leone, realizing, wait a second, we can go back. So you have these two sects primarily, and also a few Cubans. So there was all these transnational migration that was going on between these primarily three communities that were like, we can return back home. So they all returned and descended to Lagos by the mid to late 19th century with their faith, with commerce, with all the skills that they've acquired, and they built a new Christian quote unquote community in Lagos. So the missionaries, the primary missionaries that ended up doing more evangelism work amongst the Yoruba in the 19th century were Yoruba people. Either their parents were the ones who ended up in Sierra Leone, or they themselves, someone like Samuel Ajayi Crowther, he was the one who left, but he was really young, right? So these guys were the ones which the British Missionary Society was pushing to evangelize their own people. So it's more complex. And so when you read their account, even though they use the racist overtone in the way they describe their people and the way they describe, primarily not even the way they describe their people, describe their religion. It's always the religion bit that is difficult for them. In the way they describe the religion, when you read behind it, you see they're also subversing those ideas, even if they use the language. So they may use the language, oh, Yoruba religion is idolatry. And you're thinking, what? How can you, as a black person, be saying this? But then when you go on further, you see, no, there's a lot of subversion going on. That was just the language of the 19th century. To describe anything African religion was idolatry, or paganism. But really, when you begin to read through their works, you're thinking, wait, there's subversion going on because they would say, well, I remember one particular missionary, Reverend James Johnson, he was called Holy Johnson because I think he was just one of those vicars that was fervent in prayers like Reverend Natasha is. So Reverend Natasha Holy Johnson. Um, and so he was an interesting guy because in his work, it's called Yoruba heathenism. Can you imagine? That's literally what his book is called, Yoruba heathenism. But in there, even when he comes up to the question of who God is to the Yoruba, he basically says the Yoruba have always believed in God. There's no white person, no white religion brought God to us. We've always believed in God. And so he spends time really going deep into the idea of Olodumare to the Yoruba. And then what he does that I found quite interesting in his work is he basically gives license to say, well, I'm assuming maybe he had people's questioning his writing at the time. And he basically says, well, think of even the idea of God, the English word God. Think of all these ideas that we have. The English were able to wrestle with their own pre-Christian understanding of who God is when Christianity came. The Greeks were able to do it. These other traditions were able to do it maybe 100 or 1,000 years ago. Why can't we do it? So you see the subversion going on, even if they use overtly racist description or descriptors underneath there's subversion going on. And that's why I'm saying that the missionaries were a lot more complex than others. I would say you would have two extremes, or middle ground. So you would have people, I'm thinking particularly a white Catholic missionary, French. He was a missionary to the Yoruba, but kind of settled more in Benin Republic today, but it's still Yoruba land then. It wasn't Benin Republic, Nigeria. It was just Yoruba land. But he settled more on the Yoruba speaking part of Benin Republic. But he was an racist missionary. And so he never saw anything good in the Yoruba religion, and he condemned everything. It's all idolatry, it's all satanic, it's all Satan worship. That's all he wrote. And then so that's like the extreme end. And then you have the kind of middle ground who would see the Yoruba religion as being anticipation for the Yoruba, for Christianity. So their work was, okay, just like the writer of the Hebrews goes through and goes through different stories within the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures to say, well, Jesus is the greater Moses, Jesus is the greater angel, Jesus is the greater sacrifice, Jesus is the greater temple. These guys do the same thing and say, well, let's understand what Yoruba religion is, and then let's see how Jesus has been anticipated, because that's the only way we can have conversation with our own people. So they would primarily say, well, sacrifice is such a big thing within your cosmology. Everything you do is always coming back to sacrifice. When you meet Ifa, he will always tell you to perform one element of sacrifice in order to find solution to your problem. So sacrifice is such a big part in our cosmology. So if sacrifice is a big thing, then it's not too difficult to understand the work Jesus does as the ultimate sacrifice. So these were the conversations they were having in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And then you have those on the other extreme, missionaries who I'll say push the boundaries even more. And I'm thinking primarily a missionary called Emmanuel Lijadu, Reverend Emmanuel Lijadu. His parents ended up in Sierra Leone, so he returned with his parents back home. And he again grew up within the missionary CMS, British Anglican Missionary Society, became a Christian, became an Anglican vicar, and became a missionary. But he was really daring. And let me give you two reasons why I say that. So his first account of Ifa, so he's one of the first that actually wrote Ifa, like put it down in writing. So when we look at some of the works or some of the things we understand about Yoruba religion today, we should give a little bit of like the early missionaries gave us some of these accounts, you know. So they were all not bad. So some of the early works that we have on Ifa were written by the missionaries, good works actually. So his first work was more polemic, and what I mean by that, it was much more looking down on Ifa and saying, Ifa is wrong and Jesus is the way. So that was his kind of early work, written 1890, that thereabouts. Within 20 years, less than that, something happened with him. I don't know what happened, but something happened where his second work, you see that he's completely changed. So when you see his second word, which is called Orunmila, which is the name of Ifa, he has a picture. I might have to send it to Reverend Natasha, where he takes a picture of him sitting at the feet of a Babalawo priest, an Ifa priest, with his notepad. And essentially, what you see, he goes through a series of years being tutored by an Ifa priest as a vicar. He basically learnt at the feet of this Babalawo priest and became his student. And essentially, he spends years learning Ifa, years deconstructing the understanding of Ifa that he inherited, perhaps from
Mm.
parents or from the Anglican Church at the time. He basically goes through his own Damascus Road experience. And he comes to a different revelation by the time he writes his second book on Rumila. And in there, he meticulously goes through all the orikis, which are the praise poetry of Ifa. He goes through each of them to show that Ifa or Orunmila is the pre-incarnate Christ. And he does a parallelism work where he has all the orikis of Ifa and the different biblical texts to show, hey, look, the Yoruba have always anticipated the Jewish Messiah, and this is how. When I read it, I was in awe that this kind of work was being done in the late 19th century by missionaries that I wanted to hate.
Yeah,
And I was
yeah,
if they were doing this work, if they were asking the same questions we are asking today about faith and religion, about African religion and Christianity, where's space for us? Why did God make us this way? Is everything to be jettisoned, right? Is everything to be
Mm.
rejected? These guys were having the same deep questions. So for me, reading their work was incredible because I saw people that were like us do those work and
Yeah,
come
yeah,
out with incredible theologies and come out with an incredible understanding of who Jesus is in their context.
yeah.
So they
Amen.
weren't looking for a white Jesus. They were
Mm.
rejecting the white Jesus without actually making it so obvious to their British
Their
partners,
sponsors.
their sponsors. But in their very work, and some of them in their very sermons,
Yeah, yeah,
they were
yeah.
doing these works. So I hope that kind of gives you a bit more context and complexities to the missionary account to the Yoruba speaking people. I'm sure other parts of Africa may be different, but
Mm.
particularly the Yoruba, majority of the missionaries were Black Yoruba speakers.
Wow, 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 wow. Nothing new under the sun. And it gives us so much permission as, this generation now, we're calling it, people are leaving church or doing all of this stuff. Actually, what you're doing is not new. You're just walking in actually a tradition of how it is that you carry that on. That's really helpful for, I think, I hope that's really helpful for people to not feel so shook about it. And that, and as you've described it, that kind of anticipatory approach. From an Anglican point of view, it would be, well, what I've learned is it's a very sacramental approach that actually God, all things came through God. And so you should expect to
Yes,
find
yes,
Christ where you're
yes,
going,
yes,
and so therefore you shouldn't be afraid. Whereas a kind of colonial Christ has got you everybody shook, and it's a them and us mentality rather
exactly.
than
And actually,
something.
just to even pinpoint on what you've said, um, I think it's incredible. One of the things always helped me is I think it's in Colossians where it says, "All things was made f by him." So it's talking about Christ. All things was made by him, and the bit that really got me, particularly in this journey, is for him.
Yeah,
And I thought, so everything that white Christianity and colonialism has taught us to hate and run away from, if it's made to worship Christ, whoa, that changes the whole paradigm.
it
That
does.
changes the whole how we think about these things, right? So now the question doesn't become run away because it's all demonic. The question is, wait, how can this, as a Christian theologian, how can this very thing glorify Christ, who it was all created for?
Oh, beautiful. I'm thinking of a Beyonce song right now where it says, I run into you. And that, this idea that you are running into who he is, deeper into who he is, because, and there's something about the particular, it's not a mistake that you are born who you are, of the lineage that you are, their
Yes, yes.
understanding. It's one of those questions. It's like, what are we going to do that people haven't heard God? And, what happens?
Hmm.
Actually, he's
Hmm.
already there. It's just
Hmm. Hmm.
how it is that you're able to turn that into that understanding of what that means in your culture, in your
Hmm.
particular, and we've all got work
Yeah.
to do. We've all got work to
Yes, yes,
do,
yes.
turning back to those things and not being afraid of it, and that's what it's for freedom that Christ has set us free. Go and enjoy and
Yes, yes,
look. And I
yes,
love this image of
yes.
this Anglican priest sat there, a black man Anglican priest. You're talking when you say the late 19th century, you're talking at the same time that they're doing the actual division of Africa.
Yeah, same time, same
Same
time.
time.
So when they were carving out, same time, carving out Africa, there was the massive community. There's actually a cultural, religious renaissance that was taking place in Lagos. I didn't say.
What?
So Lagos becomes a cosmopolitan society by the late 19th century. So same time they were carving out Africa, right? There was a buoyant cosmopolitan society. So Caribbeans had traveled back to Lagos because they have heard about it. So it was a huge Caribbean society there. So even for example, fellow Nigerians listening now would have heard of something called agege bread, which is like, the bread is like the softest bread ever, right? Most Nigerians will think, yeah, agege bread is always our great grandfathers were eating it. No, it's brought by a Jamaican in the 19th century. All these kinds of like we don't know these histories, right?
Wait till the rest of the family, Beckfords and Selena Stone, start hearing this. What is this? Tell me about this bread.
So it's called
It's a
agege
beautiful
bread,
sign. We're going
right?
to have to do communion
So
on that.
every Nigerian would know what an agege bread is. And it's particularly localized within Lagos, but it's such an amazing bread that is spread across the entire Nigeria. But it's baked in a particular way and it's incredibly soft and quite cheap. Growing up, I've always known about agege bread. It's the ones that you get in London is not as amazing as the one back home, right? But ask your Nigerian friend what agege bread is. But agege bread was brought by a Jamaican in the 19th century to Lagos. So Lagos was a cosmopolitan society, was where enlightened, quote unquote, African descendants were trying to return back home to.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
became the spot returning back home. So you had Cubans, you had Brazilians, and you see the architecture even today in Lagos. When you go across, it's an area in Lagos called Lagos Mainland. If you go to Lagos Mainland, just look, you see the footprints, the prints of this community in the very buildings and architecture. And you're thinking, wait, why is there Gothic building in the middle of Lagos? It's
Mm.
because there was a buoyant, transnational community that had settled there.
Wow.
So in that same community, there was a cultural revolution where they were like, hey, what is our history? So in that community, they wrote, new accounts of the Yoruba history. They wrote revived Yoruba religion. For example, Reverend James Johnson, Holy Johnson, the one I
Yeah, yeah,
initially,
yeah.
at a time he stopped refusing to baptize children with Western names. Said, I'm not going to baptize any children with Western names.
Blap, blap.
He
Love it.
said, not doing it. So at that time, there was a revolution that was going on in the 19th century, particularly late 19th century, same time Africa was being carved up. Um,
Mm.
and the church was part of that. The Anglican church was part of that. The Baptist church was part of that. But I'll say the Anglicans were leading that.
Absolutely fascinating. Whoa, people, we are already, look at this depth and understanding that we've been sharing in. We're going to take a little moment um, to just give you a chance to chew that or chew the fat, what you've heard already, and we'll come back for our part two. Okay, so I'm really happy to have us back here together just to reflect on all that we learned in that first part of our conversation with Akeem. I hope you felt it was rich and, there's lots of stuff, ideas, memes that are just being thrown out and new ideas coming back in. I really loved this idea of Lagos at that time being this cosmopolitan place. The bread, my gosh, we're going to have to do a communion using this bread. Honestly, this is what the beauty of history teaching us something about what has gone on in the past and what we're remembering and what we're celebrating. So, um, just absolutely fantastic to talk to you, Akeem, and just have this stuff here. I've got so many more questions, and but I'm feeling like we need to do a little bit on you and your gods. But I still want to go back and ask some of these additional questions. So let me start with asking you, what is your research? Where is God in all of this? What is your research teaching you about God? What impact did it have? Has it had on your own faith journey, discovering some of these things about Ifa, about all these Black missionaries and their radicalism, and that what has that done for you?
That's such a great question, Reverend Natasha. And I think as academics, it gets really difficult because sometimes you forget the reason why you're doing the work you're doing. And it
Yeah.
happens to me so many times in this
Mm.
journey of PhDing where I forget why I'm writing and why I even started this journey. So I didn't even explain initially that the primary reason why I'm I started this journey and want to do the hard work, that is scary at times, is because I wanted to give um, my friends, myself, my family, the tools to wrestle with how can I be truly black and authentic and still be a Christian?
Yeah.
How can I take the histories of our people seriously and
Mm.
their own faith journeys and their understanding of who God is seriously and still be a follower of Jesus? And
Mm.
those are the questions that have always been at the heart of the work that I'm doing. But if I'm not going to lie and be honest, it sometimes get lost in the academic grinding, just trying to survive,
Mm.
right? writing papers that honestly sometimes are meaningless.
Mm,
Doesn't center the questions our people are asking. You write and it's only going to be read, purposefully read by a few,
mm,
and it's not accessible to my cousins, not accessible to
mm,
myself 10 years ago, not relevant to the things we're
mm,
dealing with as a community in the UK, for example, the Black community in London or in the UK. But those when I look back, those or still consider those are the things that drive me. And honestly, being on the field when I went to Ile-Ife last year, ending last year, it completely just brought that back again. Um,
mm,
when I was like, wait. I'm too much dwelling on the thing. That's what I'm saying. Ile-Ife is an interesting place. The primary mode in which they operate there is spiritual. They don't play
mm,
around. Like I can't explain it, and there's now I'm understanding. For example, one of my favorite theologians, Willie James Jennings, and
mm.
he's always going on about the importance of land to identity, the
Yeah.
importance of land to faith. And I never understood it. When I read, I thought theoretical until I visited Ile-Ife maybe about 13 years ago, but it was different. The first time I visited properly, like myself, was 2 years ago. So before my fieldwork last year, I went there for a conference for 10 days.
Mm,
And I tell you, as soon as I got to that place, I knew there was something different about this land. The land,
mm,
the soil was just different. And
mm.
it's so infused. When they say it's a city of 201 gods, take it seriously.
Amen.
Just
Okay.
that city. So for me, going back last year to do some work for 3 months, it completely changed my faith in ways that I can't even begin to explain. It just, in leaps and bounds, completely changed my faith, changed my understanding sometimes of who I think God is. Um,
Mm,
and I feel like sometimes with God, it's like the more you think you have a grasp of God, the more he slips away from you
mm,
more that like God just keeps slipping away. You think you've kind of grabbed God, and yes, this is yeah, I can explain all the 2 points of God, and this is how God works, and this is what
mm,
God does, and this is God's actions, and these are God's nature, and all this kind of stuff. And you want to so simplify it as a theologian and write sim books, systematize it,
mm.
the idea of God just slips away once again. And that's become my faith journey is I understand and I revel and I love who God is, and then again he just slips away. And it's like you're constantly, but it's like a playful dance that God always invites us into,
Yeah.
um, of discovering who he is and stuff. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that kind of answers a bit of the questions you've asked.
Yeah, no, no, no. It's just Akeem, it's difficult to do a podcast with you because I just want to take it wherever we're gonna go in the conversation because there's so many things that we could jump off from, and it's it just is feeding so much to even think about the fact that actually what my mind came to was as you were saying that God slips, it's like God being sand, but actually every grain of sand together is the rock, and you're
Yes,
not being that there's no loss in
yes,
or lack in who God is, and His
yes,
presence is there with you, but you
yes,
will not be able to put me
exactly.
in your box in that
Yeah,
way. That
exactly.
and but I just think it's so beautiful that you're doing this work, that it's doing this work inside of you. That how does that feel? And because our discussion here has been about the recommendation 32, which I'll fling in later, but in terms of just really understanding that we're wanting to liberate people who were impacted by slavery and colonialism to be able to, take up what is their tradition, what is their history, what is the gift that God gave them in the philosophies of those
Yes.
communities
Yeah.
and bring that to
Yes.
pause and let those have a dialogue. And you were doing exactly that. This is, like you put it in the dictionary, what does it look like? To be doing recommendation 32, you are the photo next to it with this labor that
You're so
you're
kind.
traveling to these places, you're looking at you're asking these questions, and the courage that is with you and the spirit that is with you to keep you, and that you're discovering all of these crazy little things, stories that it's not, as we say in the patois, it's not the way that you thought it was,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that there is still truth in that the violence happens. Some people, there are people who want, to have a blanket perspective. Yes, the missionaries were great. And we can't have that because we know
Yes.
that there's a range of people that are in that.
Yes.
And so I love how you're encouraging us to be courageous to do that. There will be some Christians who's like, wait, he went and he was trying to become, and he was sitting at the feet of this priest, and they've completely freaked out by that. You're not. And I think perfect love casts out fear.
Oh, but I must confess that it's I thought it was a battle I'd overcome, but it's a constant battle with this work, which is you're constantly second guessing yourself. And
Yes.
many a times I come and think, God, why am I even doing this? Like, is this what I should be doing? How can I be asking such questions? And where am I leading people to, right? Like, why should I be asking questions? Isn't Jesus enough, as they say?
Mm.
So why am I asking questions of our traditions, of our histories, of the way our peoples understood who God is? Why does that matter? And it's a constant fear sometimes where I'm like crippled. I remember a really like important professor that I really look up to in his work. And I remember asking him, and he's a pastor, and I said, Prof, like, how do you do the work you're doing? And he said, when he was doing his work, particularly his PhD, turning it into a book, he many a times went to his supervisor and said, I think I'm sinning against God. Like, and legit, when he said that, I was like, Amen, prof. Like, I'm there with you. There's many a
Mm.
times I think I'm definitely like a heretic. What am I doing here? There's many places. I'll give you a perfect example. I remember when I was about to go to Ife. So I spent a week in
Mm.
Lagos with my auntie. Shout out to her. And she knew I was going to Ife for research, but she overheard a conversation I was having with a friend of mine, and he had gone to Ife to do research a couple of years ago. He's American. And I was asking him, so what was it like? He's a Christian as well. So I said, so what were the things you did and what are the things you didn't do? So I said, and he was like, oh yeah, classic, you're gonna have to buy schnapps, gin, and you're gonna have to offer it to the gods. And I was
Mm.
like, oh man. And he's like, yeah, they're gonna ask you to drink as well and partake. They may get you to get bitter cola, um,
Mm.
and they're gonna pray for you and all this kind of stuff. You're gonna have to eat at the shrine. And I was just like, oh
Oh
my
my.
God, like this is a crisis of faith here. What the hell do I do? Particularly as a researcher, but that's not even that important. If I had no faith, it's easy, you just do anything. But
Yes,
then as a
true.
Christian, growing up with all these kinds of imagery of African spirituality, it's demonic, they're going to take your soul, they're going to use you for money rituals, all these kinds of Nollywood. Nollywood is Nigerian Hollywood, guys, if you didn't know, but it's massive. But if you look at predominantly Nollywood, it's like African religion is evil. It's going to take your birthright. It's going to give you stress and problems. Don't ever near them. So all these kinds of imagery that I've grown up in, not that my parents said it was devilish, but Nollywood taught me
So
that it was here. Forget the missionaries and the colonialists. They've done a good one.
Nollywood's doing its job, boy.
Exactly. We're producing these films that are basically, saying everything about us is to be feared, or what Dr. Carlton Turner would call self-negation. So you
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
see this replayed in the kinds of music or films that we're producing. So I remember my auntie overhearing the conversation. And so I was asking him, I think I might want to engage. And he said, oh, how come? I said, I don't know. Like, do you remember when Paul in First Corinthians 15 was talking about eating food to
Mm,
idols? I don't like the word
mm,
idols, but eating
yeah.
food to idols and stuff. And then he talks about, yeah, if your conscience is strong, go ahead, eat it. It means nothing to you. But you
Mm,
also have to consider your brother and your sisters whose faith
right,
might
yeah.
be weaker. So if you know that by eating at these temples is going to cause your brother whose conscience is weak to fall, then abstain from it, right? So we're having these, scriptural debates about what I should do when I get there. I literally had like 3 days before I went there, and my auntie overheard this and she called me to the side. She's like,
Of course she did. Of
"What
course she did.
come, 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 come." And I was like, what's going on? She was like, I heard your conversation. I was thinking, oh my God, I already know where this is going. Don't you dare eat at any shrine. If you eat there, they're going to. Oh, what she was saying is that it's going to be a back way in which they're going to initiate me. They're going to
Mm,
initiate you. They're going to take your star. You have a little child now. You have to consider him. You're not lonely or single anymore. All this kind of stuff. I was just like, what? So I literally, after my conversation with her, forget the scripture. I was in fear. And then here it's where it got interesting. My second day when I got to Ife, I went to visit the shrine, the main shrine that I was researching on. The festival is based on Moremi, and she has a shrine. She's a female deity who was just like a human like me and you, but became deified
yeah,
because of the heroic things she did.
yeah, yeah.
So then we got to the shrine. The chief priest was like, "Oh, welcome, nice to meet you, blah blah blah." He figured out, he knew instantly I was a tourist, quote unquote. Said, "Oh, yeah, before we do anything, can you buy some schnapps?" Oh, my heart started beating, and I had to bring a naira for someone else to go and buy it. So they bought the schnapps and they bought the a cola nut. Huh. In my head, I was like, oh, this man ain't gonna ask me to partake. So he takes the schnapps, the gin, prays over it, pours, puts some in a shot of glass, and pours it to the first shot to Moremi. Hey, I thought, hey, I'm in trouble here. First shot to the deity. It's over for me. Forget research. This is another territory I was not prepared for. I just wanted to sit down in the library, read my books, and theorize about Yoruba religion, how amazing, and just sit there and just do interesting work. Now I'm there and I'm faced with this dilemma. Are you going to engage or not? So they all have a shot. I was thinking, maybe I'm not going to get any. Thank God I'm okay. I'm not going to be polluted. And then he takes one and says, here you go. Hey, I was like, I'm in trouble today.
Yeah,
Within
great.
1 second, I had to make a decision. Do I drink this thing or do I say, oh, sorry, I'm teetotal? And I said to myself, nah, guy, you just have to drink it. And I
Let's
drank.
drink, babe.
Don't worry, no demons came over me, quote unquote. But it was probably the first. Like this was real. This wasn't theory. Like sometimes when we talk about African religion, we like to sit and theorize how amazing, all this kind of stuff. But this was real. I
Abstention.
was in exactly. And so there were many a times in which the first week was difficult because, I remember even sitting under a different shrine and it was their festival. And one of the priestess came to me and my cousin who was with me and gave us food. And I'd already eaten before, but she was like, "Oh, Orumila is wants you guys to eat the communal food that everybody's eating." And I was like, "The Orisha wants me to eat this food." And I was trying to tell her that I've eaten already. She was like, "No, even if it's
No.
just eat one spoon or something." Hey, I was like, "God, why am I in such what's all this?" Because I want to understand African traditional religion. Look at all of this.
Look at this has brought me. I can
But
get,
I ended up
listen,
eating
I
it.
can get this. All of these things are going on in the head. I get it. I hear you.
Within split seconds, all these kind of deconstruction, different things was going through my mind, and I was like, I have no choice. And I obviously engaged. Um, but in all of this, I learned so much about our people. I
Yeah,
learned so much about what mattered to them. And even for them, some of them knew I was a Christian without me telling them.
of course.
Um, and I never expressed my faith because I was doing research. It wasn't
Mm.
really about me. I was there to learn from them and learn about them and learn about their practices and their rituals. But what I remember when I engaged in drinking schnapps or even eating food at the temple, what that meant for them,
Yeah, yeah,
and the ones who knew I was a Christian, what that even meant for them
yeah.
was
Mm.
like, this guy does not look on us in judgment.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was just like, whoa, I didn't even see the significance of just even breaking bread and what that even means for some
Mm.
and the openness that came thereafter. And that's when I thought, oh, what if I didn't engage? And I remember going back, I had a family in Ife itself. So I asked one of my aunts who's a Christian, and I said to her, at the temple, I had to do this and do that and do that. She was like, no, you had to because they were praying for you. How, even if how rude will it have been for you to reject their prayers and say, no,
Mm.
I'm okay. I'm covered with the blood of Jesus. Of course, you're covered with the blood of Jesus.
All the
They
time.
only praying for you. There's
Mm.
no harm in that. And then I was just like, so it took, after a while, honestly, when I got to the like 6 weeks in, I was like, pass the schnapps even before they're even trying to do anything. I'm like, pass the schnapps.
Mm.
But it was intensive work, deconstruction upon deconstruction upon deconstruction.
Oh, mate,
Sometimes, yeah, it was hard. It was
you could
hard.
write a book on the communion just on that story there.
What it means, right?
You know,
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
like,
What it have been like for early missionaries to have engaged traditional indigenous religions on their own terms.
yeah, yeah,
What kind of Christianity would have been birthed if missionaries did not come in their hubris and pride that they're coming
yeah.
to teach, and the God that they bring is the perpetual teacher? What
Mm.
if, like Jennings would say, they went in that, they are the learners?
Yeah,
What
yeah.
if Christianity went into these spaces and saw itself as the learner and therefore sat at their table rather
Mm.
than inviting others at our table? It made me ask so many these kinds of questions.
I'm just here silent. It's not often I'm quiet. I'm telling you, what a beautiful thought. A complete, that is upside down kingdom, as they say. Complete turn it around as to what it means to be invited to this table and this provision that has been made. That's just a incredible, incredible thought. Have you
I
got
don't know, I
anything
feel
else you want to
like
share after that? What comes up in your heart?
it's a
Just you're
difficult,
smiling.
I find this journey incredibly lonely,
Yeah.
in the sense of a lot of Christians don't understand why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. Even if you tell them where it initially comes from, their their first reaction is do not engage,
Mm.
right? And so often trying to communicate what you're doing is incredibly isolating because they either see you as a, you know, backslidden Christian, quote unquote, a Christian who is syncretizing. I don't even like that word, by the
Yeah,
way.
yeah, it's problematic.
I've banned it from my dictionary,
Yeah, yeah.
or my Christian dictionary.
Mm.
Or when you speak to, others, um, just don't understand what I'm doing. So it becomes an incredibly lonely journey. Um, and also
Mm.
for those who are engaging in it, my heart often goes out because there's a lot of stuff out there that I don't necessarily think they're that helpful, particularly
Mm.
in even understanding traditional religion. There's a lot out there. People have written all kinds of stuff that I don't actually think are that helpful.
Mm.
Some of the people that even write in this stuff have never been on the field. They sit in
Yeah.
their libraries or sit in their homes and just write stuff, or they come on different podcasts and they talk anything, or YouTube is the big one. People just
Mm,
pick up and they just talk anything. And then I don't necessarily think they're leading people to wholeness. And so
mm,
my whole hard work, lonely work, is for us as a Black community, whether that be in the UK, in the Caribbeans, in Brazil, in America, wherever we're located, in Africa and the continent, to actually find wholeness. Uh,
mm.
but the road to wholeness is incredibly difficult and marked with a lot of pain and suffering, I would say.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Beautiful point. Gospel point just there in how, it is a narrow road, and there are some, this is the issue though, that there are so many people that, you can have church full. I was in church, another church on Sunday, and you can feel that people want to have that kind of hype experience, but there is a lot of loneliness in the journey, that you have to do that singleness, and you have to do that journey of just being alone and walking that journey alone. And Christ shows us that all the time, and we're fortunate that we're just doing it in the safety of our Christian journey, and also going back into our own traditions.
Mhm.
But the fear that's in that amygdala about it, that has been you, if these are the moments that you realize how much, that colonizer Jesus Christ is in there. He just needs, flinging
Oh
out, but it's
man,
work.
big work. And I remember a particular moment in my field work where I was struggling with fear.
Mm,
And one of shout out Professor Anthony Reddy at Oxford messaged me privately and said, I'm sure he doesn't mind me sharing this, and said, Akeem, what is it that you fear about your own people? And why do you have
mm,
so much fear? And I was thinking, what? And he said, think about it. Which tradition and religion has brought more harm to your own people than white
yeah.
Christianity?
Mm,
Isn't that what you should fear the most?
mm.
And I sat there and think, okay, it's an academic question, but it's deep,
In the heart.
deep heart issues. And that's when and that was my early, like maybe 2 weeks in. And that really helped me because I asked,
Mm,
why am I so afraid of my own people? What's the worst that they're
mm,
gonna do? They ain't gonna do anything to me. And
mm.
for example, when I told Christians in Ife that I was always in the shrine, they were freaked
Of
out.
course.
Like, what? They haven't used you for human sacrifice? I'm looking at them like, what? These people are in the shrines eating bread and enjoying and celebrating
Mm,
and sacrifice. What are these people talking about? So you realize that the deep, deep capturing of our minds and our imagination is beyond what we could have imagined. And even me, I've been on this journey for years. It's on the field I realize, man, there's still work.
good work, man.
There's still work to be done. And like you said, Christ sets us free. And that's always
Mm.
my prayer is that we find freedom in him.
I had all these questions about the gospel good news and how it does all of this stuff, but you have just talked it all through in that sense, that this is what it looks like. There's no point just looking at the history and asking questions. You've got, what is it meaning for us now in terms of, and I had my smart little question: what does Jesus have to do with this? What does Jesus have to do? And, can someone be an practitioner and Christian? I was reading a book the other day, and they're talking about Christianity plus plus. That's how they regard themselves because the Christianity plus plus is then, if Christianity, does that exist? Is that where you're?
Good question. Am I campaigning for plus plus? Um, no, I don't think that's what my primary work is involved. I'm not campaigning for plus plus. Um, I think I'm more in the position of some of the early Christian church, primarily, for example, the writer of John,
Mm,
who was writing in a Greco-Roman context, and so took Greco-Roman ideas, Platonic ideas of the Logos seriously,
mm,
and thought, wait a second, I'm in this culture, I'm in this philosophy, I'm in this society, I'm in this worldview. What does Christ mean for a Greco-Roman worldview? Not a Greek, not a Jewish worldview.
mm,
And so one of the statements I took seriously was where he says Jesus is the Logos, Jesus is the Word.
yeah,
That is not a Jewish term. That's not a
mm,
Jewish understanding of what the Messiah is. That's deeply Greco-Roman Platonic ideas. And he played with it comfortably. And so for me, that was my license, was like, and
mm,
you kind of see the second century, particularly the second century early church, they wrestled with what do we do with philosophy? What do we do with Greco-Roman philosophy and our understanding of the Christian faith? There were some who were extreme and said, no, all Greek philosophy is devilish and evil. We should not engage with it. But majority of the church in the second century engaged with Greco-Roman philosophy, and it enriched their understanding of who Jesus is to the Greco-Roman world. It doesn't mean you reject the Jewish Jesus, of course not. But the fullness of who Jesus is even more expressed in the Greco-Roman world. And I took that seriously and said, well, what if Jesus wasn't born in that world? And what if Jesus was born in Yoruba land 2000 years ago?
mm,
Now, what will that mean? That
mm,
means we would have to confront Ifa and what that means for to express the fullness of Jesus,
mm,
right? I think it's Rowan Williams that really picks up on the whole idea of, these different contexts fully capture and express the fullness of who Jesus is. And I think that's what my work is like, well, these things are nothing is unredeemable and not all things are evil, quote unquote, right?
mm. That's a
How
powerful.
can these things, how can these ideas, how can these practices glorify and display the fullness of who Jesus is? And that's my work, is if
Mm,
I can display the fullness of Jesus. How that is done, I don't have the answers. I
mm,
know that missionary that I mentioned, Emmanuel Lijadu, he attempted, and I think he did an excellent understanding of what Ifa and Christ is. So he built a whole Ifa Christology. Essentially, that's what it
mm.
was. It's
Wow,
Ifa
wow.
Christology. So for me, that is an example of the kind of work that I'm interested in wanting to engage more with. So it's not plus plus. Jesus is enough. But how
Mm,
can Jesus sit comfortably in whatever context you find yourself? And I really do believe Jesus sits comfortably. We're not the
mm,
ones that sit comfortably because
mm,
we have a lot of fears. But Jesus has no problem in sitting fully in a Greek outfit. Therefore, Jesus has no problem fully sitting in a Yoruba outfit, right? And that's why the one of the books I recommend, Jesus and the Deep Forest, Afia Kuma, who's not a theologian, she's just a church auntie,
mm.
literally a church auntie. And these are just
Fair.
collections of her poem.
Mm,
And I love it because it interrupts the work we think is great theology. But
mm,
when you read her work, as an incredible, prayerful woman, she was essentially trying to capture who Jesus would have been in her Akan culture. So she's
mm,
not interested in questions of divinity versus humanity. That's not the
mhm.
context in
The
which the
Senate
Akan are
stuff.
necessarily. Yeah, those are not the philosophical questions she's interested in. But can Jesus be the one who defeats the great python in the forest?
Mm,
That when we go to farm, terrorizes us and kills us.
mm,
Can Jesus be the one who defeats that python? Can
mm,
Jesus be the greatest boat that ensures I don't sink when I'm fishing? These are the questions in which she's wanting to engage what it means for Jesus to be Akan. And
mm,
so these works for me are exactly the kind of work I'm interested in,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
as opposed to Jesus plus 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 plus.
Mm.
And those are the questions I even got on the field. I remember a chief priestess husband, interestingly, is actually an imam priest, a Muslim cleric, quote unquote. And he called me to the side and said, have you considered being initiated into what I'm studying?
Oh, is he playing ball? Come on now. Yeah,
Yeah.
go
And I said to him, let me use the analogy because it helped. So I said to him, interestingly, I didn't plan this conversation. I didn't even know he was going to ask me such a question.
on.
So, and I was like, how am I going to respond to this without offending him? So, interesting enough, I took a bottle like this, half full,
Mm,
and said, sir, you know, this bottle is half full. I can get another bottle and fill it up, right? Fill it up, fill it up, fill it up, and it can become full, no problem. So I said, I'm not that bottle that is half full. I'm the bottle that is overflowing. So there's no capacity for you to put more. So there's
mm,
no capacity for plus, plus, plus because
mm,
it's overflowing. And he
mm,
was like, what do you mean? I said, I'm a deep follower of Jesus. I
mm,
respect my culture and I respect what I'm seeing, but God's not calling me to get initiated into anything. I'm
mm,
fully initiated into following Jesus. There is
mm,
no more capacity beyond that. There's no space in the bottle. And he
mm,
looked at me and laughed. And he said to me, we're not asking you to reject Jesus or stop going to church. We're just asking you to get initiated. And I laughed and I said, you're saying you're not asking me to reject Jesus and stop going to church, but you're asking me something I don't think is possible.
mm,
To which we never got an answer. I think he eventually understood that I was not interested in getting initiated. So I'm not in the business of calling people to get initiated into different systems, Orisha, whether that's Oshun. And when I was out there, I saw a lot of African Americans. I met a lot of Cubans and Brazilians who were being initiated into all kinds of different Orisha traditions. Some of them were Christians, some weren't. But I was always fascinated with the ones that were Christians to ask why.
mm,
Why are you getting initiated and what is it wholeness you're looking for, right? Like what, and
mm,
try to understand the journey that has taken them to feel the
mm,
need to be initiated. So, am I calling for plus, plus, plus? No, but what am I calling for is Jesus can be expressed fully in all of our thought system, in all of our philosophies, all of our cultures, and can truly be glorified through them.
yeah.
I don't know if that
Love
helps.
it does, it does, it does. I think we need to have ratchet theology, honestly, because I hear all of that. There's a part of me that's like, where did the Greeks get the logos from? Apparently, ma'at, which is a Kemetic idea, as the balance, the full understanding of everything. And because we are the people that live in the aftermath of this 400 years of the creation of a global caste system
Mhm.
that, the other day we were talking about perma racism, that this is the scar that we have.
Mm.
And an aspect of that, we're talking about in recommendation 32, is that the theology was adjusted to do that, to justify that. And so this is what has created the reality that is around us, because it's absolutely true that the word, the mind, becomes
Mhm.
flesh and it kills people. You and I know this. And so I'm looking at one of your other books, Must God Remain Greek? What has happened is that the
Mhm.
Greco-Roman
Mhm.
world has become essential to
Yes,
Jesus.
yes,
He must wear the toga.
yes, yes,
And
yes.
you spoke about the cloak, that your name means this cloak. How is it we allow Christ to wear the cloak of every culture, of every community, and to sit? When you were talking, I'm imagining him sitting and this relaxedness of being able to sit in this space and be comfortable.
Exactly.
We just did the other day, Jesus at the wedding in Cana. He's pretty chill, chilled, and people are trying to pull him into all of these different dramas that are going on. What has it got to do with me and you, woman? And I know my own mistakes. So I see a lot of these kind of pictures as you're talking. When you were talking about your auntie wanting to drag you back and say, no, I'm seeing Jesus and his mother going, what are you doing? What are you doing? Where are you going? And not understanding, actually, this is about calling. This is
Yes.
about
Yes.
mission that God is
Yes.
like, I want you. And it's the same as you talked about how it is science, it is all of these things in these ways. When you're doing apologetics, they'll talk about because we believe in a stable God, that's why you can do science the way
Mm.
that we
Mhm.
do, because he's a God of order.
Yes. Yes.
And so he's sending all of these various people with their passion for, I don't know, space or the sea or, cellular biologies or neuroscience. And because he's a God of order, he has a joy
Mhm.
in the fact that I created you to find out all
Mhm.
about the systems. I
Mhm.
laid them out. It's almost like, not to make it too, but if a father who lays a map, a game for you as a child to explore and
Mhm.
has so much joy watching you
Mhm.
enjoy.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we just end up in these kind of corners where people are too frightened to enjoy the environment that he planned for you, that
Mhm.
he's given you the intellect to go through, that he deliberately put you in the flesh that you're in. I would have struggles because I don't speak Yoruba. So it's not that I can't, I can learn. But you are speaking it as a mother tongue, you're asking the questions that your mother, as you watched her doing stuff, that only you can do it authentically in that way. And I
Mm.
just love and want to bless that you're doing that,
Thank you.
because what has happened in we talk about Black theology, the most of the theology that most people are brought towards is actually a form of white theology. It's synchronistic. It's wearing jeans, tight jeans, and doing its thing in its own particular way, or these weird dresses that they're putting us in, all to do with the 15th and 16th century. But must God, the book that you put there, must God remain Greek? When
Mm.
yes, the philosophy is there, and John is using it in exactly the appropriate way. But when they make it essential,
Yes. 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 Yes.
Jesus is this essential bit, but they make their culture essential.
Exactly.
It's a claim for power.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
And that's the bit that is a problem, I think, for me, that white theology has no awareness of itself. It has no awareness of the power claims it's making. It has no,
Yes.
it deliberately connects itself. White cultures connect themselves to
Yes.
Greek. They won't
Yes.
let them in,
Yes.
into into the European Union, but we will completely steal all of your kind of philosophy and
Yes.
claim all of this. They
Yes.
don't, they love Paul, but no Turkish man this side is coming
Yes.
in. And
Yes.
the hypocrisy of it that is so rooted in this last 400 years. And I feel deeply, I'm of Bajan heritage. You'll see it on this here, up here, backwards. I've got a little, for people who are listening and can't see, I've got a little wall display that says Barbados. Barbados, 1661, is the first place the first white supremacist law comes into, it makes land there, it's put in statute there, because that's where the legal frameworks, and that's what, for the Caribbean, everybody had to come to Barbados to get your rubber stamped in whatever way that you wanted. And I understand someone you might know as George Washington came over and took this idea to Virginia, and it was taken to Jamaica, and the rest, as they say, is history. And
Mm.
so understanding the role of places like Codrington in that
Mm.
place, whilst branding, whilst
Mm.
doing this, you're changing the theology in a way to make
Mm.
it
Mm.
that God must remain Greek,
Mhm.
God must
Mhm.
remain white. And I
Mhm.
just, where am I taking us, everyone? Just that reflection that we need to be able to have more confidence that God is not afraid. He didn't make your particularity is not a mistake. You are called before the foundation of the earth. It's not a mistake how and who you are.
Mhm.
And you have to manage all of us have to manage our mothers, our
Mhm.
culture around us. I've got a picture here. My Black Madonna. I'll show it to you.
Oh
She's very pregnant
wow.
and she's looking quite stressed. I bought her in South Africa 20 years ago,
Wow.
and she's actually Zimbabwean, you know. But in terms of, you see the worry on her face, she's very pregnant. But this is what it is. Our cultures are sometimes so worried about what we're doing, but this is what we were called to do.
I agree.
And we might die on a cross doing it, but that's what we were called to do. And we've all got our little journey that we need to do. And what colonial Christianity is, it tries to inoculate you with fear that you can't run in the late ways, and that's what makes it so sinful, because it's so wanting to hold you back from the actual what God called you to do.
Mm.
And so I just think I want us to reflect on how, for each one of us, we've got to be able to go, whether that's Rastafarianism, whether that's, we've got all of these Santeria, we've got all of these riches that our ancestors have given us. And some
Mm.
of it is to take forward, and some of it is to stay, to say,
Mm.
yes, we're going to stop that, but to
Mm.
have the confidence that God knows about, and that
Yes.
that isn't that what stewardship should be, that and I just feel that we're being truncated by mentalities about the goodness of God and his providence that are so scarcity, that are so, oh, I've got to stay in
Mhm.
this, these two,
Mhm.
between these two
Mhm.
lines of whiteness. And I'm just like, no, 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 no,
And it's
no.
interesting you say that because I remember, I think it must have been like 2 years ago. I was just walking and just been thinking about these big questions. And I remember like just sensing that, for 500, 600 years in relation to Black people and Black religions and Black spirituality, Christianity has always given the hands of judgment.
Mm,
That has been the history between the two to a large extent. But what does it look like for Christianity to give the hand, or for us to give the hand of mercy? That's
mm,
the thing I've always constantly had. Like, what would it have looked like if it wasn't judgment, but mercy? Uh,
mm,
and therefore a different kind of engagement, because judgment still engages, it just
yeah.
engages different. But what if mercy engages? What will it look like? And I think essentially that's, what you've just described there is exactly what my work is. But like you said, it's a constant internal work of battling and deconstructing um, all those kind of colonial whiteness that we've all
Mm,
viewed and think it equates to Christianity. That's the hard bit, is sensing what's Christian and what's actually just white culture.
mm,
Uh, and therefore, if everything Christian it becomes white, then anything black it
yeah,
becomes.
becomes.
And sometimes that's the paradigm that we're constantly operating in. And
Mm,
the part of the work is to be daring, is to push the boundaries, and hopefully give people the freedom to explore. I don't have
yeah,
all the answers, but at least the tools in which we can explore these big questions.
such a privilege to sit with you and talk these things through, and just really understand more about how we do this walk. Because in the end, that's all it is: how to walk this walk, and that what you said about this, how lonely it is at points, but it takes deep faith to just follow God wherever He goes, and for
Mm.
that to be seen and blessed is really important, rather than this mentality that you're supposed to be with the crowd all the time. God is with you.
Mhm.
Us having this conversation is church.
Mhm. Yeah.
And, it's better that you think these and we think these things deeply together. Um, and, I just want to thank you for your time, honestly.
Thank you. It's been an absolute privilege to have been on this, to speak to you. And I've not had many spaces to actually explore and talk about what I'm doing. So this is an incredible privilege for me. And I just want to say thank you and God bless you in the work you're doing as a church, as a ministry, and your work. So thank you.
Blessings and blessings around. So, for everybody that's listening, I hope you ate well. I hope you ate well. We had what a spread we have just had. I just want to express my thanks to our guest, Akeem Adagbada. I'm getting there.
Adagbada, I'll help you out.
Come on, help me out because you gave me a cloak today.
So it's Adagbada. Yeah,
We're going to practice later.
practice later.
I love that. And so we come to the end of this episode. What an incredible conversation. It's rich, it's rich, it's rich. I just want to let you know this is Community Theology Thursdays podcast. We're based at St. Nicholas Church. If you want to kind of keep up on what is happening here at St. Nicholas Paravel, you can catch us on Facebook and Instagram. And you can definitely find us at St. Nicholas Paravel.church. And you'll find there's link trees, there's all of that. But what I wanted to express is that having the opportunity to talk to global majority theologians who are doing such beautiful work here, it needs to be sponsored, it needs to be supported, it needs to be loved, it needs to be listened to. And so, please do share this conversation with people far and wide, because I hope it gives people courage to explore what God has given them and enjoy it. Enjoy the culture that you've come from, enjoy the community and the journey that you're on and that our heritage has been on. And do that knowing that God is holding you rather than you're having to hold on to Christ. He will hold that. And for us to be able to continue those conversations, we do need sponsorship. So if you know of somebody who might want to sponsor a future Community Theology Thursday event or a series, I'm on the edge of possibly doing a conference just to bring all of you beautiful people together in one room for people to listen in. If you know somebody who would be a blessing to us to support us in that, please ask them to email me at rector@stnicholasparavel.church. And without further ado, I hope you enjoy this episode, and we will be back next month. We have another speaker. I'm not even going to tell you who it is. We'll advertise it and share it, but please do come back. We always have amazing people who just have beautiful things to share. So thank you again, and we'll catch up soon. God bless.